evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought. We're going to start off right away with a recently recorded interview with Louisiana landman Dan Collins.
Good evening, Dan.
Good evening, Wayne. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm glad to have you on. I wish we could do it live, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of other opportunities.
That's fine, Wayne. Whatever. I know where the holiday season is among us here, upon us here, and whatever works, I'd be more than happy.
Right. No, I'd be happy to have you on too. And don't let me forget to also voice my willingness to host the proposed debate. But we'll get into that before the end of the time.
Yes, in fact, I found that most amusing, and I would like to comment on that.
I will. I made myself a note here, but let's get to your brief first. And first, let me, if you would, bring the listeners up to what got you to this point today. You are a Louisiana landman. You do title searches and all kinds of research to facilitate large property deals or whatever, purchases for the state, right?
Well, yeah, it was. We were working as public employees for the state of Louisiana, performing land work.
Right. Okay. Hang on.
You know,
you're. I'm trying to keep this concise because I know we've got a lot of things we want to cover, and I don't mean to be rude, Dan, but yeah, you during a deal you were working for or researching for the Department of Natural Resources under Scott Angel. You were doing some work in the Atchafalaya Basin with some pieces of land there, and during your efforts, this is back in 2009 or 8. You discovered what appeared to you to be some fraudulent activities by property owners and the state and the Atchafalaya Basin director?
That's correct. In the period of 2007, we made a discovery.
Okay,
that
and then
the water quality project was actually an oil and gas access project.
Right. It was a predominantly federally funded project that was supposed to be for improving water quality. When in fact, or what you discovered, you discovered a lot of evidence indicating that it was actually being done to deepen a canal to provide access for oil drilling rigs. And you won a lawsuit in 2010 against the state because you, in your lawsuit and on my show previously, you claimed that you went to Director of Natural Resources Scott Angel and the Director of the Atchafalaya Basin, Robert Benoit, and told them about all this, and then suddenly you saw your work disappear or decline and then disappear, and you charged the state under the whistleblower claim and won that trial, correct?
That's correct. It was
okay.
a reprisal trial, reprisal for the event that I stopped receiving contracts for the state after I brought this environmental whistleblower information forward.
And then after a protracted time, I think you pointed out in the last show that the state finally filed an appeal. And
yes, the trial was actually in December of 2015. The jury awarded my firm $750,000 plus attorney fees, plus expenses and interest. And since that time period, the state, through the law firm Oates and Marino, has filed an appeal. They pushed it back several times and delayed, but here we are at the toward the middle of November, and they finally have submitted briefs over to the First Circuit Court of Appeal.
Okay.
In fact, we have since responded also. Being my attorney, Crystal Bounds and Jill Kraft here in Baton Rouge.
Right, and that's what that brings us up to date for today, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today is the legal brief that Ms. Bounds filed in response to the state's appeal to your case. It looks to me as though the state made 4 arguments that she responded to, and the one listed as number 1 is apparently they claimed that your whistleblower lawsuit should not have been brought because you didn't act soon enough to, complain about it and file your complaint.
That's correct, Wayne. It's a legal term that they said that the claim had actually prescribed. and we differ we differ with that opinion. It was filed timely. In fact, I just didn't discover this overnight. It took a series of about 3 years to kind of put it all together.
Right, but here in your forgive me, Dan, again, I'm not being rude, but here in the brief, Ms. Bounds states that the DNR failed to object to the jury interrogatories or instructions in this case regarding your filing, and they did not request a limiting instruction regarding the par bid. So it looks like what you're saying here is that the state is now claiming you didn't have a right to claim that or to bring your suit, but they didn't make that claim during the suit, during the trial.
That's correct. The train's already left, Wayne. They can't make that argument now. They know this. We know it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's one of the things that they've argued.
Yes, and I find it interesting that Ms. Bounds, your attorney, stated here, DNR should be prohibited from coming to the court after the jury verdict has been rendered and arguing that the jury was confused, because they never said that before. They waited till after the appeal or after the verdict, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct. And this is on file at the courthouse. And
yes.
Any of your listeners can go actually pull a copy of their brief and our brief, for that matter. It's interesting reading. In fact, it's a document that's paid for with public funds.
And we all have access to it, yeah. And I could read it, so it's readable, I mean, it didn't confuse me too much.
Right.
But, okay, the second... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, the second argument that Crystal Bounds responded to was apparently the state claimed that you waived your right to claim money damages for the contract in 2010 that you did not get. Is that what they said, or
They're trying to basically, Wayne, and they tried to do this throughout the trial, that I didn't follow proper procedure and the actual preparation of my bids for contracts, that I didn't follow proper procedure for when I didn't get a contract and disputing. So what they've tried to do, and they brought a litany of witnesses forward to try to say that, Dan, you just didn't fill out the document properly. You didn't follow the rules properly. Wayne, I had contracts from the year 1998 to 2010. I had over 12 contracts over a 12-year period. I can assure you, I knew how to fill out a contract. I knew the proper procedures.
Well, you already assured the jury in the whistleblower case, and they believed it, correct?
Correct.
So
in fact, the state has tried to, of all of the witnesses the state brought forward, they repeatedly tried to discredit me.
And they could not, yeah.
And in fact, I will say this, several of the key witnesses, a gentleman for the Attorney General's office, the second party in command at the Department of Natural Resources, their lead contractor, all impeached themselves on the stand. And what I'm saying there, Wayne, is pretty basic. When you take a deposition of someone under sworn oath, a deposition, you can't come back months later or years later in trial and change your testimony. And they tried to do that on the stand. It's called impeaching yourself.
Well, basically getting caught in an inconsistency, let's say, in your own testimony.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
And of course your attorney, Crystal Bounds, called them out on that and showed them the record where they had legally.
So appropriately that she took their deposition that had been given under oath, sworn oath, and asked them to read their testimony, to recant their testimony, and then she pointed out how they changed it the day of trial.
Wow.
And now this is an attorney for the Attorney General's office that testified on behalf of the state. This is the confidential assistant to the Louisiana Department of Natural Resource Secretary, and this is the lead contractor that was on the case on this water quality project. All changed their story under oath. Yeah, it's called not coming forth with the truth.
Very interesting. So they apparently, as far as you know, told the truth in their written statements beforehand, but then in court they changed the tune.
Well, exactly.
Okay.
They changed the story. They changed the story, and the jury saw that. You know, Wayne, you have to give our democratic process credit. Here we had 13 jurors, 12 actually sitting on the jury, and it was their charge to hear the facts, make a decision, render a verdict, which is what they did.
Mm-hmm.
They were not confused. The state tried to say, "Oh, the jury was confused with the facts." No, when you see people changing their story, changing their testimony, when you see the overwhelming amount of information that we uncovered, and to expose the underbelly of Louisiana politics and what actually happened with this so-called water quality project that was supposed to be for fishermen and crawfishermen, which actually turned out to be nothing more than an oil and gas dredge for the improvement to the financial gain of a handful of landowners and their exploration oil and gas companies. You know, the jury got it. There was no confusion on their part.
Yeah, well, from what I've read here, it looks like you and your attorneys made a pretty good argument. But speaking of the jury, the third complaint that the state made in their appeal was that the trial court committed prejudicial error by admitting, it looks here, the first thing was that by admitting the records containing your denial of work or the punishment they've meted out to you. And, of course, it states in here that they didn't object to that during the trial. They're objecting to it now, you know?
That's right, Wayne. You know, when someone loses a trial, you could say out of a form of desperation, they come up with any and everything that they might try to overturn this. You know, the problem is as I said earlier, the train has already come and gone. They're reaching.
Yes.
They are reaching. And the interesting thing about this is the delay. I pointed this out in your last program. They delayed with the trial effectively to get it pushed back to just beyond the gubernatorial election, of which the former Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources, Scott Angel, was running for governor. He's in the middle of this entire event of my whistleblowing trial. And he was the head guy. This went all the way to the general administration, all the way to the top. This gentleman, he was even the lieutenant governor at one point. He knew all about this project. He knew that this was an oil and gas project before it was ever dredged. And I have since the trial, discovered more information on a second water quality project on the same landowner's property that directly ties to the same individual. This Secretary Angel knew all about it, you know. But again, they've managed to now delay the appeal process to coincide to the congressional race of which the former Secretary Scott Angel is a candidate and is in a runoff.
Yes, he's currently in a runoff in District 3 with a Clay Higgins. Have you or anybody from your attorney's office informed him or his campaign people and attorneys about any of this?
Mr. Higgins?
Yes.
I have not. I have been told that some of the press, you know, what's interesting is all you have to do is Google my name and Bayou Postilion, and article after article after article will come up. So I have been told by others that that information was supplied to Mr. Higgins, but no, I have not spoken to him, nor have I ever met him. I did listen to his Crime Stoppers video that went viral, and my gosh, does that gentleman seem like an upstanding citizen that would be excellent in Congress? He believes in the Constitution. It just, I'm impressed. I'll say that. That's not in my district, that particular voting, but I'm glad to see that they do have one good candidate in the race.
Yeah, I hope you're right. Of course, a lot of politicians said they believe in the Constitution and then demonstrate they either don't or have never read it. But anyway, let's see here. We talked about, that was number 3, right? There was also a quote here. I'm flipping through in case you haven't heard me. There's a quote here from one of the parties involved where they stated outright prior to your initial trial against the state, or the trial with the state, that they themselves had known all along that this whole land deal was to promote oil and gas exploration. And I can't find the quote now, so I guess I'll have to just let it drop unless you remember it.
No, I will say this: it was known. It was known by a select few that it was oil and gas. In fact, there was a governmental employee prior to me who brought this information forward to her superiors, and she got terminated. She got fired. Now, she was rehired within the Department of Natural Resources, but I wasn't the first one, Wayne. And the other thing is, I wasn't the first one to see this. There were crawfishermen and fishermen and outdoorsmen that were out in the basin, saw this dredge occur, saw oil and gas activity, knew that this was not for water quality. And so, I'm just the one who brought it forward. And that brings me to one of the next items under the appellate brief was the state, and this is what they argued at trial repeatedly, that I wasn't considered a public employee of the state of Louisiana. Therefore, I shouldn't have the ability to bring forward a lawsuit. Now, if you think about this, they're not arguing what happened.
No, I've seen none of that.
They're not arguing what information I brought forward to detail and show, and how they changed the names on bayous in the public bidding process, and how they erased the names of people who wouldn't sign the key documents to be signed by the governor. A series of items. They wouldn't. They're not arguing that. What they do come back and they're trying to put their hat on and say, "Oh well, Dan really wasn't an employee. He didn't have the ability to bring this forward." Well, by definition, with the Louisiana Ethics Board, I am considered a public employee. I brought that information forward. I even filed an ethics complaint with the Ethics Board. I played the game correctly.
And what's the point of having a whistleblower law if it's not going to protect everybody that blows the whistle? I mean, otherwise they could just hire people that aren't allowed to file a lawsuit and then do what they want,
Well, one thing I can tell you, Wayne, from the top down, because this was delivered directly to Timmy T. Pell, directly to Governor Jindal, directly to Secretary Scott Angel, directly to my immediate supervisor, Mr. Benoit, I can assure you there was an obstruction and effort to cover this whole matter up as if it didn't happen. And once they realized it finally was going to go to trial, what did they do? They pushed it back so that ideally Mr. Angel could get elected governor, which didn't happen. And what's happened now? They've pushed back the appellate process so that ideally he can get elected to Congress.
Yep.
I think your listeners should be aware of this, because I think everyone should know. Do we want somebody in Congress that is aware of how our public funds, our state, and in some cases, federal funds are being spent. This is all about coastal restoration. And if Washington, if the nation knew what was going on, that here I have two projects directly tied to oil and gas, where they were dredged on the same landowner's property. Those landowners having been related at one time or related to Governor Mike Foster. You know, if the world knew this, if the country knew this, I think it would affect what we are trying to do with our efforts with coastal restoration.
Well, sure. It would also create outrage and everything, you know, and people would come stamping in the street, presumably. Of course, it wouldn't happen by most of the citizens of Louisiana because they take it for granted that everybody's corrupt in our government. But, you know, I think a lot of the rest of Americans would be outraged that this abuse of their money is occurring so freely, at least, you know, from what you've seen and from what they have not denied, the state, I mean. But you did mention a long time back in our initial show, which shamefully for me was a long time back, that you have no standing to bring a suit against activities, and I don't either, for that matter. Would the crawfishermen or anybody have an interest in bringing a lawsuit for this fraudulent behavior? I mean, I'm getting off the subject of your suit.
It's the same thing applies, Wayne. The courts have come back. In fact, at Bayou Postilion, the Atchafalaya Basin Keeper had actually filed a federal lawsuit along with LEAN, Louisiana Environmental Action Network. And after about 2.5 years, almost 3 years, the federal judge threw it out saying they didn't have standing. Well, you know, that's a matter of interpretation because who actually has standing if you catch somebody doing something they're not supposed to be doing?
And they're polluting or damaging a piece of public property, basically, that the canal they dredged.
Well, it's pretty obvious, and I encourage your listeners to pull out a map. It's on the east side of the Atchafalaya Basin. It's only about a half an hour drive and about a 10-15-minute boat ride. I encourage your listeners to go out there and take a look. See what happened. It was a beautiful cypress tree lined bayou that went right up. It was just so picturesque. And what happened? They've created an oil and gas access canal that literally you can see from outer space.
And you can get there by road, huh?
You can get there by road, but you do have to take a boat for about 10-minute boat drive. So that, you know, there's boat landings up to it. And, you know, Wayne, I know you mentioned earlier, I don't know how our time looks, but you mentioned earlier about a challenge for a public debate.
Yes, I'm glad. Yes, I want to mention Mike Staggs. He's the one, he and the Independent of Lafayette and ABIZ, which I'm not going to guess at what it means. I think I do, but they are publications that have broken most of this story. And Mike Staggs notified you that he had interviewed Robert Benoit concerning all of this and your testimony and I guess the state's appeal and everything, and he issued a challenge, did he not, to debate you publicly? He did.
And I just received this information this morning, but I received an email dated November the 18th, Friday at 5:55 p.m. From Mike Stagg. And as you mentioned, Mike Stagg is an independent environmental journalist. He's a reporter. He actually also does radio. I was asked to be on his program on June 27th on 96.5 FM in Lafayette. Mike has a program called Where the Alligators Roam. And he did a program, he entitled it Dan Collins, the Honest Landman. And it's a very informative for those. It's actually online for those that would like to do a podcast. But Mike has done some articles for ABIZ and for the Independent here recently. One of the more recent one was the first time it's a mistake, the second time it's on purpose. And he talked about this second so-called water quality project dredged by the Atchafalaya Basin program. But Mike sent me this email, and it says that he interviewed Mr. Benoit yesterday. Now, that would be November the 18th.
Mm-hmm.
In the interview, he's referring to Mr. Robert Benoit, who was my point person that I spoke to, challenged you, meaning me, to a public debate during which you'd both be hooked up to lie detectors.
I'm better. Go ahead.
Y'all would be able to ask each other questions. I found that real interesting, Wayne, because one, I've already won my case.
Mm-hmm.
A jury has heard almost 4.5 days of testimony. The state put on literally countless witnesses. They spent no telling how much money of public funds trying to say I was wrong, and the jury came back and said I was absolutely right.
Yep.
There was a reprisal to the tune of $750,000 to my firm. Now one of the parties is wanting to debate, and he wants to hook up. He wants to hook up to lie detector. And my response to this is absolutely. I would be more than happy. However, I have a caveat to it. I would, and I don't mind the fact that there would be 2 against 1. I say Mr. Benoit, who was the confidential assistant to the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources Secretary, Scott Angel, I say they both should come to that debate, Mr. Angel and Mr. Benoit, and I would be happy to take the challenge of being hooked up to a lie detector.
Well,
so that all three of us could be able to set forth questions and hear the true answers.
Right. Well, I'm confident, and I want to say this now before I mention one other thing, but I am confident that WHYR 96.9 FM Baton Rouge Community Radio would be more than happy to host the debate and broadcast it live if Mr. Angel and Mr. Benoit would like to come do it. But I would ask you, though, just now, would you refuse to meet Robert Benoit if Mr. Angel didn't come? Would you?
No, I'd be Wayne. I'd be happy.
Okay.
To meet Mr.
Just
Benoit.
wanted to make sure we were clear.
Mr. Benoit happened to be on one of the parties on the stand that impeached himself.
Yeah.
And so I would be happy. And look, Wayne, throughout this whole procedure, I've extended invitations to everyone, anyone and everyone. These are the facts. This is what I uncovered. This is what took place. Can you explain it? I've seen Mr. Benoit and Mr. Angel go to great efforts through the Jindal administration to try to obstruct and cover this up. But no, this didn't really happen this way. It happened this way. Well, a jury has already spoken. What good it will do for Mr. Benoit now to come and under a lie detector when presumably he was under oath. I mean, we know he changed his testimony under oath. So, these are nothing but words. We'll go to a lie detector and we'll both get the opportunity.
Well, is he still a public official?
From what I understand, Mr. Benoit has left state government through the so-called Jindal administration and is now working for the city of Lafayette.
Okay, I saw that.
If I'm not mistaken,
okay.
The mayor's office.
Yes,
the mayor's office.
He's the confidential advisor to him, I believe. The reason I ask is that that gives a journalist or a radio talk show host the legal cover to contact him and invite him to come and debate you. And so I shall.
I think that would be perfectly fine. In fact, I think it would be superb if we got one of the congressional candidates to come on because his confidential assistant seems to think that a lie detector setup would be the best.
If there's got to be some kind of a social network forum for the congressional candidate, and maybe I can find one and just ask publicly. But we'll see. We'll work on it. Right now, Dan, we're running up against the deadline here. To the listeners, we've been talking with Louisiana landman Dan Collins. And Dan, I wish you the best with everything, and I appreciate you keeping me informed on this. And
Well, thank you, Wayne. As always, it's my pleasure.